I always thought our life was a canvas of quiet perfection, painted with routine and trust. My name is Daniel, a 42-year-old architect, married to Clara, a vibrant art curator whose laughter could light up galleries. We lived in a restored Victorian house in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by ferns and the hum of creative neighbors. Our mornings were rituals. Coffee brewed with beans from local roasters, Clara sketching at the kitchen table, me reviewing blueprints. Her hazel eyes sparkled when she talked about her latest exhibit, and I'd listen, captivated, believing our bond was unbreakable. But cracks formed silently. Started with her phone always face down now, buzzing at odd hours. She'd smile, dismiss it as work, and I'd nod, trusting her. Clara's job demanded late nights, gallery openings, artist dinners, and I was proud of her hustle. Yet, something shifted. Her perfume lingered differently, sharper, as if masking another scent. She'd return from events distracted, her stories vague. I chalked it up to stress, her passion for art consuming her. I didn't pry. Love, I thought, meant giving space. Then came the evening that splintered my certainty. Clara was at a gallery event, and I, home early, decided to surprise her with her favorite dessert, lavender macarons from a pâtisserie she adored. I drove to the gallery, the box of sweets on the passenger seat, imagining her delight. The gallery was dim, closed to the public, but I spotted her through the glass. She stood close to a man tall with sharp cheekbones and a tailored suit. His hand grazed her arm, and she didn't pull away. Their laughter echoed, intimate, slicing through me. I froze, the macarons forgotten, my heart a drumbeat of doubt. I didn't confront her. I drove home, the dessert untouched, my mind replaying that touch, that laugh. Was I overreacting? Clara was tactile, always hugging colleagues, but this felt different, deliberate, hidden. I lay awake that night, her absence in our bed a void. When she slipped in at 2 a.m., smelling of wine and something musky, I pretended to sleep. Her breathing steadied, but mine didn't. I stared at the ceiling, wondering who this man was, what he meant to her, and why she hadn't mentioned him. Trust, once a fortress, now felt like sand slipping through my fingers. The next morning, I said nothing. Clara kissed my cheek, her routine unchanged, but I noticed her phone was now password protected. I sipped my coffee, bitter, and began to watch her, subtly, silently. Every glance at her screen, every late night, every vague excuse stacked like bricks in my mind. I wasn't ready to accuse her, but I needed answers. I needed to know if the woman I loved was still mine, or if she'd given herself to someone else. The man's face haunted me, sharp and unfamiliar, etched into my memory from that fleeting glimpse through the gallery window. I didn't know his name, but I needed to. Clara's behavior hadn't changed overtly. She still hummed while cooking, still left paint smudges on our table. But the air between us felt charged, like a storm brewing. I became a detective in my own home, ashamed of my suspicion yet driven by it. I started small, checking her coat pockets when she showered, finding nothing but receipts and gallery passes. Her phone was a fortress, but I noticed she typed faster now, her thumbs dancing with purpose. I decided to dig deeper. Clara kept a leather planner for work, scribbled with names and dates. One evening, while she was at a client dinner, I flipped through it. Amid her chaotic handwriting, one name appeared repeatedly, Julian Voss. No title, no context, just Julian with times and places, cafes, galleries, a hotel bar. My stomach twisted. Was this him? I googled Julian Voss Portland and found him instantly. A 38-year-old sculptor, known for abstract metalwork, his Instagram filled with brooding self-portraits and gallery shots. One photo stopped me cold. Clara, laughing, her hand on his arm, captioned, "Inspiration in good company." The betrayal wasn't physical, not yet, but it was there, in her secrecy, her ease with him. I cross-referenced her planner with his public schedule. Their meetings aligned too perfectly. I felt foolish, a man piecing together a puzzle he didn't want to solve. But I couldn't stop. I started tracking her movements using an app we'd once shared for safety. Her late nights weren't always at galleries. Some pinned her at addresses I didn't recognize. Lofts, studios, places tied to Julian's world. One night, I followed her. She'd said she was meeting a curator downtown, but her app showed her at a warehouse in the Pearl District. I parked a block away, my pulse racing, and watched her enter a loft with exposed brick and soft lighting. Julian was there, greeting her with a hug that lingered too long. They disappeared inside, and I sat in my car, gripping the wheel, imagining their conversation, their closeness. I didn't storm in. I wasn't ready to shatter our facade. Instead, I drove home, the city lights blurring through my anger. Clara returned at midnight, her cheeks flushed, claiming the meeting ran late. I nodded, my silence a shield. I began collecting evidence, screenshots of her app's history, photos of her planner, Julian's posts. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it, but it gave me control, a way to anchor my spiraling thoughts. Each discovery cut deeper, yet I clung to the hope that I was wrong, that Clara was still the woman who'd vowed to love me forever. But hope was fading, replaced by a cold resolve to uncover the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The truth was a blade, and I was carving myself with it. Clara's secret life with Julian Voss was no longer a suspicion but a reality I couldn't unsee. I'd lie awake, her sleeping form beside me a stranger's, replaying every moment I'd missed. The late nights, the locked phone, the way her laughter now seemed rehearsed. I was Daniel, the devoted husband, reduced to a shadow in my own marriage, stalking my wife's lies. Yet I hadn't confronted her. I needed more, something undeniable, to justify the storm building inside me. I started digging into Julian's world. His sculptures, all sharp edges and twisted steel, were celebrated in Portland's art scene. His website listed upcoming shows, and I noticed Clara's gallery was hosting one. It wasn't a coincidence. She'd curated it. I attended the opening unannounced, blending into the crowd of pretentious types sipping overpriced wine. Clara was there, radiant in a black dress, her arm brushing Julian's as they charmed patrons. Their chemistry was electric, a silent language of glances and half-smiles. I stood by a sculpture, its jagged form mirroring my thoughts, and watched my wife belong to someone else. A woman nearby, a gallery assistant named Mara, recognized me. "You're Clara's husband, right?" she asked, her tone hesitant. I nodded, forcing a smile. Mara's eyes darted to Clara and Julian, then back to me. "She's really invested in his work," she said, her words heavy with implication. I pressed her gently, and she admitted rumors were swirling. Clara and Julian were inseparable, spotted at private venues, their connection more than professional. Mara's pity stung worse than the betrayal itself. I left the gallery, my mind a furnace. At home, I searched Clara's laptop, left open by chance. Her email was a goldmine. Messages to Julian, not overtly romantic but intimate, discussing their time together and what it means. One email mentioned a weekend retreat in Seattle, framed as a work trip I hadn't been told about. I cross-checked her planner. She'd marked it as a solo trip. The pieces fit too well, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. I began planning my own moves. I contacted a private investigator, a discreet man named Paul, who specialized in infidelity cases. I gave him Clara's schedule, Julian's details, and the Seattle trip dates. Paul's voice was calm, professional, promising photos and reports. Hiring him felt like betraying Clara, but she'd betrayed me first. I needed proof, not just for confrontation but for what came after. Revenge was a word I hadn't spoken yet, but it simmered, dark and patient, in my chest. Clara noticed my distance. "You okay, Dan?" she asked one morning, her concern almost convincing. I lied, said work was stressful, and she accepted it, her relief palpable. She thought she was safe, but I was closing in. Every lie she told, every secret she kept, fueled my resolve. I wasn't just her husband anymore, I was her reckoning. Paul, the investigator, was worth every penny. His first report arrived a week later, a sterile email with attachments that burned through my denial. Photos showed Clara and Julian at a Seattle art retreat, Not in conference rooms but in intimate settings. A rooftop bar, a dimly lit restaurant, her hand resting on his knee. One image captured them leaving a hotel, her hair mussed, his arm around her waist. The report detailed their movements. Shared meals, private studio visits, moments no colleague would share. Paul's notes were clinical, but they gutted me. I saved everything to an encrypted folder, my evidence vault. Each photo was a wound, yet I studied them, memorizing Clara's expressions. Carefree, alive, in a way she hadn't been with me in months. Julian's smug grin fueled my anger, but Clara's betrayal was the deeper cut. How long had she lived this double life? Had she ever loved me, or was I just a stable backdrop to her passion for him? I kept up appearances, cooking dinner, asking about her day, while my mind churned. Clara sensed nothing, her lies polished now. She'd talk about gallery drama, omitting Julian, as if he didn't exist in her world. I nodded, my silence a weapon. Paul's second report came before the Seattle trip ended, confirming they shared a hotel room. No more doubts, no more excuses. My wife was giving herself to another man, and I was done being the fool. I started researching Julian's life. His sculptures sold for thousands, but his finances were shaky. Loans, late payments, a lifestyle propped up by charm. He lived in a rented loft, drove a leased car, and had a reputation for fleeting romances with art world women. Clara wasn't his first conquest, just his latest. This knowledge didn't soften the blow. It sharpened my focus. He was a predator, and she'd fallen for his veneer. But I wouldn't let them rewrite my story. I met Paul in a diner, his weathered face unreadable. He handed me a USB drive with audio, Clara and Julian's phone calls, intercepted legally through public channels. I listened later, alone, their voices a poison. "You make me feel free," Clara said, her tone soft, unguarded. Julian's reply was smooth. "We're unstoppable together." They planned more trips, more secrets, oblivious to my growing shadow. The audio was my final piece, proof of her heart's defection. At home, I watched Clara paint, her strokes bold, unaware of the storm I was crafting. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed her to feel secure, to keep weaving her lies, while I built something bigger. Revenge wasn't just about exposure. It had to dismantle their world, piece by piece. I began sketching my plan, not on paper but in my mind, each step deliberate, each outcome cruel. Clara thought she'd outsmarted me, but she'd underestimated the man she'd vowed to cherish. I was no longer just Daniel, I was her consequence. Living with Clara became a performance. Each day a tightrope walk between love and loathing. I cooked her favorite risotto, smiled at her stories, kissed her goodnight, all while my evidence folder grew. She'd curl against me, oblivious, her warmth a mockery of our past. I played the devoted husband flawlessly, but inside, I was a furnace of calculation. Every lie she told, another late meeting, another solo trip, was a thread I'd use to unravel her world. I wasn't just gathering proof anymore. I was architecting her downfall. I expanded my research, diving into Julian's network. His art relied on patrons, galleries, and critics, a fragile ecosystem of egos and favors. I found his main patron, a wealthy collector named Evelyn Hart, through art blogs. Evelyn was territorial, her funding tied to Julian's loyalty. If she learned he was distracted, her support might waver. I also discovered his upcoming show in Chicago, a career-defining moment. Disrupting it could cripple him. Clara's role as curator gave me leverage. Her reputation was tied to his success. I began to see their betrayal as a house of cards, and I'd be the wind. Paul's updates kept coming. Clara and Julian were reckless now, meeting at his loft, unaware of Paul's long-lens camera. One photo showed them on his balcony, her head on his shoulder, the city sprawling behind them. I stared at it, not with pain but with clarity. This wasn't love. It was a fantasy they'd built on my ruins. I contacted Mara, the gallery assistant, again. Over coffee, she spilled more. Clara had diverted gallery funds to promote Julian's work, risking her job. Mara's loyalty was to the gallery, not Clara, and she agreed to quietly gather documents. I started planting seeds. At a gallery event, I casually mentioned Julian's charm to Evelyn Hart, hinting at his wandering eye. Her smile tightened, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. I also befriended a critic, Tom Weiss, who reviewed Julian's work. Over drinks, I fed him doubts about Julian's originality, citing rumors of copied designs. Tom's interest peaked. A bad review could tank the Chicago show. I moved carefully, each step disguised as coincidence, my tracks invisible. Clara noticed my busier schedule, meetings I invented to cover my scheming. "You're working too hard," she said, her concern a lie wrapped in care. I shrugged, saying architecture was demanding, and she bought it, her guilt making her blind. I was no longer the man she'd married. I was a strategist, my love for her replaced by a need for justice. The revenge I envisioned wasn't loud or violent. It was surgical, a dismantling of their dreams. As Clara planned her next work trip, I finalized my opening move, a letter already drafted, its words sharp enough to cut. She thought she'd won, but the game was mine and I was just beginning to play. Clara's latest work trip was a lie I'd already unraveled. Her planner marked a weekend in San Francisco, supposedly for a gallery conference, but Paul's report confirmed she was meeting Julian at a private art fair. I let her pack, her chatter about networking a performance I no longer believed. As she kissed me goodbye, I felt nothing but the cold edge of my plan. The letter I drafted wasn't for her, not yet. It was for Evelyn Hart, Julian's patron, typed anonymously on plain stationery, detailing his distractions with Clara, complete with a single damning photo from Paul's collection. I mailed it from a downtown postbox, my hands steady. Evelyn was a woman of pride, her funding a leash on Julian's career. The letter wasn't accusatory, just suggestive, planting doubts about his focus and loyalty. I'd included a tip about Clara's misuse of gallery funds, enough to make Evelyn question her curator's judgment. If Evelyn pulled her support, Julian's Chicago show could falter, and Clara's reputation would take a hit. It was my first move, subtle but sharp, a crack in their foundation. At home, I kept busy, sketching blueprints for a client while monitoring Clara's app. She was at a loft in San Francisco, not a conference hall. I imagined her with Julian, their laughter a blade in my chest, but I channeled the pain into strategy. I contacted Tom Weiss, the critic, again, sending him an anonymous file of sketches, designs eerily similar to Julian's, pulled from obscure art forums. "Is Voss original?" I wrote, knowing Tom's ego would drive him to dig. A scathing review could ruin Julian's momentum. Mara, the gallery assistant, proved invaluable. She emailed me scanned receipts, gallery expenses tied to Julian's projects, approved by Clara, some suspiciously personal, like dinners and hotel stays. I stored them in my vault, each document a brick in the wall I was building. Mara's loyalty was to her career, not Clara, and she hinted at others noticing Clara's favoritism. The gallery's board was conservative. A scandal could cost Clara her job. Clara returned Sunday night, glowing, her stories polished but hollow. I nodded, my smile a mask, and asked about the conference. She stumbled slightly, mentioning names I knew were fabricated. I didn't push. I wanted her comfortable, unsuspecting. That night, I checked Julian's Instagram. A new post showed him at the art fair, Clara cropped out but her shadow visible. My resolve hardened. The letter to Evelyn was just the beginning. I was dismantling their world, piece by piece, and they'd never see me coming. As Clara slept, I sat in my study, plotting my next move. A conversation with the gallery board, veiled as concern, that would tighten the noose around her lies. Evelyn's reaction was faster than I'd hoped. Paul, ever vigilant, overheard a heated call between her and Julian, her voice sharp with distrust. She'd received my letter and confronted him about Clara. Julian's denials were weak, Paul reported, and Evelyn had demanded a meeting before committing to his Chicago show. I felt a grim satisfaction, knowing their alliance was fraying. Clara, oblivious, continued her routine, but I noticed her phone buzzing more, her replies curt. She was feeling the pressure, even if she didn't know why. I moved to the gallery next. Posing as a concerned donor, I scheduled a meeting with Margaret, a board member known for her hawkish oversight. I prepared carefully, using a burner email and a vague alias, claiming interest in the gallery's financial transparency. Margaret met me at a sleek cafe, her gray hair pulled tight, her eyes assessing. I didn't mention Clara directly. Instead, I expressed concerns about resource allocation, dropping hints about personal expenditures tied to a specific curator. I handed her a folder, redacted copies of Mara's receipts, enough to raise questions without exposing my hand. Margaret's lips thinned as she skimmed the documents. "We take mismanagement seriously," she said, promising a review. I thanked her, my tone neutral, and left, knowing the board's scrutiny would soon fall on Clara. Back home, I watched her closely. She was distracted, checking her email obsessively, her usual warmth dimmed. "Rough day?" I asked, feigning concern. She muttered about board politics, and I hid my smirk. My plan was a machine, each gear turning smoothly, grinding their world down. I didn't stop there. Julian's Chicago show was weeks away, and I targeted its weak points. I found the venue's manager, a contact from my architecture network, and mentioned rumors of Julian's unreliability, missed deadlines, questionable finances. The manager, wary of risks, promised to monitor Julian's preparations. I also emailed Tom Weiss again, this time with a fabricated tip about a rival sculptor accusing Julian of plagiarism. Tom was hooked, his replies eager, promising a deep dive for his review. Clara sensed the shifting tides. One night, she snapped at me over a trivial dish, her nerves raw. "I'm under a lot of pressure, Dan," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. I soothed her, my voice honeyed, while my mind catalogued her cracks. She was unraveling, and I was the architect of her chaos. I lay awake, plotting the next phase, a public exposure, not to her but to their art world circle, where reputations were currency. I drafted an anonymous blog post, a gossip piece for an art forum, detailing Clara and Julian's collaboration, with just enough truth to spark whispers. It wasn't time to post it yet, but it waited, a loaded gun. Clara thought she was safe, but I was rewriting her story, and the ending would be mine. Clara's world was starting to buckle, and I watched it with a cold detachment. Margaret's board review had begun, and Clara came home tense, her fingers drumming as she vented about audits and micromanaging. I listened, offering sympathy, while inwardly I marveled at how seamlessly my plan was unfolding. Paul reported that Evelyn had cut her funding for Julian's Chicago show, citing creative differences. Julian was scrambling, his Instagram posts less frequent, his confidence shaken. I'd struck their foundation, and the tremors were spreading. I escalated my efforts. The anonymous blog post was ready, a carefully worded exposé hinting at Clara's favoritism and Julian's unprofessional entanglements. I posted it to a niche art forum under a pseudonym, knowing it would spread like wildfire in Portland's incestuous art scene. Within hours, comments piled up, some skeptical, others intrigued, a few naming Clara and Julian explicitly. I monitored the thread, my pulse steady, as the gossip took root. Clara's phone buzzed late that night, her face paling as she read. "Just rumors," she muttered, but her voice trembled. Tom Weiss's review was my next weapon. He emailed me, thinking I was just a concerned source, saying he'd found evidence of Julian's borrowed designs. His piece, set to publish before the Chicago show, would question Julian's originality, a blow to his credibility. I thanked him, my words vague, and felt the pieces aligning. Julian's career was teetering, and Clara's was tied to it. If the board found her out, she'd lose her job. If the art world turned on Julian, her investment in him would collapse. I didn't neglect the personal. I started leaving subtle clues for Clara. Her planner left open to a page with Julian's name, a gallery receipt accidentally on the counter. She noticed, her eyes darting, but said nothing, her guilt a silent confession. I wanted her to squirm, to feel the walls closing in. One evening, I casually mentioned Evelyn Hart, saying I'd heard she was displeased with a sculptor. Clara's fork froze midair, her recovery too quick. "Oh, she's always dramatic," she said, but her laugh was hollow. Paul's latest report was a goldmine. Audio of Clara and Julian arguing, their voices strained. "Evelyn's pulling out and the board's on my case," Clara snapped. Julian's reply was curt. "Fix it or we're done." Their alliance was fraying, their fantasy cracking under reality's weight. I saved the audio, another bullet for my arsenal. As Clara slept, I sat in my study, refining my endgame. The blog post was spreading, the board was circling, and Julian's show was at risk. But I wanted more. Not just their ruin, but their humiliation. I began planning a final act, a public unmasking at the Chicago show, where their lies would be laid bare. Clara thought she'd outplayed me, but I was rewriting her world, and the climax was coming. The Chicago show was Julian's last stand, and I intended to make it his downfall. Clara was set to fly out, her role as curator tying her to his success. She packed with forced cheer, claiming it was make or break for the gallery. I nodded, my support a facade, while my mind was in Chicago, orchestrating chaos. Paul had tracked Julian's preparations. Rushed, underfunded, the venue manager skeptical after my tip. Tom Weiss's review was slated to drop the day before the opening, a bomb primed to detonate Julian's reputation. I booked a flight to Chicago, separate from Clara's, using a work conference as cover. She didn't suspect. Her focus was on salvaging Julian's show, her stress palpable. The blog post had spread beyond the forum, picked up by art world gossips on social media. Clara's name was whispered alongside Julian's, her professionalism questioned. She tried to dismiss it as jealousy, but her late-night pacing told me she was rattled. The board's audit was ongoing, Mara feeding me updates. Clara's financial missteps were under scrutiny, her job hanging by a thread. In Chicago, I checked into a hotel across from the venue, a sleek gallery in the Loop. Paul met me, his briefcase heavy with new evidence. Photos of Clara and Julian at a Chicago bar, their intimacy blatant, and emails between them discussing gallery funds as their investment. I paid him my gratitude curt and studied the materials. The photos were raw, undeniable, Clara's betrayal captured in pixels. I didn't flinch. They were fuel for my final act. I contacted a local art blogger, posing as a concerned insider, and leaked the blog post's claims, backed by one of Paul's photos. The blogger, hungry for a scoop, promised to attend the show and ask pointed questions. I also reached out to Evelyn Hart, now in Chicago for the art season, inviting her to the opening as a neutral observer. Her reply was frosty but confirmed attendance. The stage was set. Julian's show would be a crucible, and I'd light the fire. Clara called me that night, her voice strained. "The show's a mess, Dan. I'm trying to hold it together." I soothed her, my words honeyed poison, and hung up, my plan crystallizing. I'd attend the opening, not as her husband but as a shadow, watching their world collapse. The blogger's questions, Evelyn's presence, Tom's review, and the board's looming verdict would converge, a perfect storm of my making. Clara thought she was fighting for Julian, but she was walking into my trap. As I stared at the Chicago skyline, I felt no remorse, only the weight of justice. Their lies had built a fragile empire, and I was ready to topple it. The show was tomorrow, and with it, the beginning of their end. I wasn't just Daniel anymore. I was the architect of their ruin, and my blueprint was flawless. The Chicago gallery buzzed with anticipation, its glass walls glowing against the night. I stood in the crowd, a gray suit blending me into the art world elite, my face a mask of calm. Clara was across the room, radiant but strained, adjusting Julian's sculptures, jagged metal forms that now seemed like monuments to their arrogance. Julian worked the room, his charm frayed, his eyes darting to Clara for reassurance. They didn't see me, didn't know I was the storm about to break. Tom Weiss's review had hit that morning, a scathing piece calling Julian's work derivative and overhyped. Whispers rippled through the crowd, patrons glancing at Julian with pity or disdain. The blogger I tipped was there, her recorder out, asking pointed questions about rumors of personal ties to Clara. Julian deflected, his smile tight, but Clara's face paled, her hands trembling as she poured wine. Evelyn Hart arrived, her presence a chill, her eyes fixed on Julian with barely veiled contempt. I moved closer, catching snippets of Clara's conversation with a gallery owner. "It's just gossip," she said, her voice thin. The owner's nod was polite but unconvinced. The board's audit hung over her, and Mara had texted me. They'd found irregularities tied to Julian's projects. Clara's job was on the line, her reputation crumbling. I felt no pity, only the thrill of my plan unfolding. Every glance she shared with Julian, every forced laugh, was a nail in their coffin. The blogger cornered Clara, asking about misallocated funds and personal relationships. Clara stammered, her poise cracking, and Julian stepped in, his tone sharp. The crowd noticed, their murmurs growing. Evelyn approached, her voice cutting through. "Julian, we need to talk. Now." He followed her, his face ashen, leaving Clara alone, exposed. I watched her falter, her eyes scanning for an escape, and felt the weight of my revenge settle into place. I didn't confront them, not yet. I slipped out, the gallery's hum fading behind me, and returned to my hotel. Paul's final report waited. An email from Clara to Julian, sent that morning, admitting she'd risked everything for him. It was the last piece I needed. I drafted a new letter, this time for the gallery board, attaching the email, photos, and receipts, signed as a concerned colleague. I'd mail it tomorrow, ensuring Clara's dismissal. Julian's show was imploding, his career tainted, and Clara's world was next. As I stared at the city lights, I felt no triumph, only resolve. Their betrayal had hollowed me, but I'd turned their lies into weapons. The final act wasn't here. It was back in Portland, where I'd face Clara, not with anger but with the truth, stripping her bare. She'd thought she could rewrite our story, but I was the author now, and my ending would be merciless. The game wasn't over, but the board was mine. I flew back to Portland before Clara, the Chicago gallery's chaos a fading echo. The letter to the gallery board was mailed, a guillotine blade disguised as paper, its contents, Clara's email to Julian, Paul's photos, Mara's receipts, enough to end her career. Julian's show had been a disaster, Tom Weiss's review and the blogger's questions poisoning the air. Evelyn Hart's withdrawal was the final blow, leaving Julian's sculptures unsold, his name tarnished. Clara's complicity tied her to his fall, and I felt the gears of my plan lock into place. At home, I tidied our Victorian house, erasing traces of my scheming. My evidence vault was backed up, hidden in the cloud, a silent arsenal. Clara's return was imminent, and I prepared for the final act. Not a shouting match, but a dismantling of her reality. I cooked her favorite meal, roasted lamb with rosemary, and set the table with our wedding china, a cruel nod to the vows she'd broken. The act was deliberate, a stage for her unraveling. She arrived late, her face drawn, her suitcase heavy with defeat. "The show was rough," she said, avoiding my eyes. I nodded, serving her dinner, my voice warm. "Tell me about it," I urged, and she spun a vague tale of logistics and bad press. Omitting Julian, the blogger, the whispers. Her lies were brittle now, cracking under scrutiny. I watched her eat, her fork trembling, and felt no pity, only the clarity of purpose. She thought she was safe, but the ground beneath her was mine to pull. After dinner, I handed her a glass of wine and casually mentioned the gallery board. "Heard they're auditing hard," I said, my tone light. Her face froze, her recovery sluggish. "Just routine," she mumbled, but her eyes betrayed panic. I didn't press. I wanted her to stew, to feel the noose tightening. That night, she barely slept, her phone glowing as she typed frantic messages. Likely to Julian, whose own world was collapsing. I lay beside her, awake, my mind on the final stroke. I'd planned a public exposure, not just for Clara but for our community. Her art world friends, our neighbors, the people she'd charmed while betraying me. I drafted an invitation, elegant and vague, for a special event at our home, sent to her colleagues, Julian's contacts, and mutual friends. The event was a week away, timed with the board's verdict. Clara would walk into it blind, thinking it a celebration, only to face her truth. I wasn't just ending her lies, I was rewriting her legacy. As dawn broke, I stared at our wedding photo on the nightstand, her smile a ghost, and knew I was ready to bury her deception forever. The week before the event was a masterclass in deception, mine, not Clara's. She was unraveling, her phone a lifeline to a sinking ship. Paul's final update confirmed Julian was in debt, his Chicago flop driving patrons away. Clara's messages to him, intercepted by Paul, were desperate. "We can fix this," she wrote, oblivious to the board's looming axe. I kept my routine, leaving for work while meeting Mara, who'd gathered more evidence. Emails showing Clara had funneled gallery grants to Julian's projects, a fireable offense. I finalized the event, renting a projector and screen for our backyard, where ferns framed a wooden deck. The invitation, sent to 50 guests, promised an evening of art and truth. Clara, distracted, assumed it was my idea to cheer her up, a gesture of love. "You're too good to me, Dan," she said, her guilt a flicker in her eyes. I smiled, my heart stone, and said, "You deserve it." The irony was my fuel. She'd see what she deserved soon enough. The projector was for a slideshow not of art but of betrayal. I compiled Paul's photos, Clara and Julian in Seattle, Chicago, his loft, paired with her emails and receipts. Each slide was captioned, clinical but damning, curator's misconduct, personal investments, broken trust. I added audio clips, her voice confessing to Julian, "I risked everything for you." The presentation was a scalpel, designed to carve her reputation apart in front of her world. I tested it at midnight, the images stark against the screen, and felt a cold satisfaction. I invited key players, Margaret from the board, who'd received my letter, Tom Weiss, whose review had gutted Julian, even Evelyn Hart, who'd flown to Portland for an art fair. Julian was invited too, a last-minute addition, his presence a spark for the fire. I told Clara the event was a surprise for her, a gallery boost, and she bought it, her ego blinding her. She spent days picking a dress, unaware it would be her funeral gown. At night, I watched her sleep, her face soft, almost innocent. I remembered our early years, gallery openings, her paint-stained hands, our dreams of a shared life. That Daniel was gone, hollowed by her choices. I didn't hate her. I hated the lie she'd made of us. The event was my answer, a public execution of her facade. I finalized the guest list, confirmed the caterer, and hid the projector's remote in my study. Clara thought she was climbing out of her mess, but I'd built a stage for her fall. The board's verdict was due the day before the event, and I knew it would seal her fate. As I polished the wine glasses, I envisioned her face when the first slide lit up, and the architect in me admired the precision of my design. The day before the event, Clara's world began to implode. She was at the gallery when Margaret called her in, the board's audit complete. I wasn't there, but Mara texted me. Clara had been suspended, pending a full investigation into financial irregularities. The evidence I'd sent, receipts, emails, proof of her funneling funds to Julian, had done its work. Clara came home early, her face a mask of shock, her voice hollow as she told me, "They're accusing me of mismanagement. Dan, it's a mistake." I feigned concern, pouring her tea, asking gentle questions. She admitted to helping Julian, framing it as professional support, but her words faltered, her lies crumbling. I nodded, my sympathy a performance while my mind was on the event. The suspension was perfect timing, a wound that would make tomorrow's exposure unbearable. Clara spent the evening on her phone, texting Julian, who'd gone silent, his own career in ruins. I overheard her voicemail, her voice breaking, "We're done if you don't fix this." He didn't reply. I prepared the backyard, setting up the screen under the guise of event decor. Clara, distracted, didn't question it, assuming I was planning a gallery tribute. I tested the projector again, the slides a gallery of her betrayal, each image a hammer to her reputation. I added a final slide, a photo from our wedding, her smile radiant, captioned, "What was lost?" It wasn't for the guests. It was for me, a reminder of why I'd gone this far. Guests confirmed their attendance. Margaret, Tom, Evelyn, even neighbors who'd admired Clara's charm. Julian's RSVP was a surprise, his arrogance or desperation driving him to show. I welcomed it. His presence would amplify the devastation. I printed programs, innocuous covers hiding the true agenda, and hired a string quartet to lull the crowd. Everything was meticulous, a facade of celebration masking my revenge. Clara, oblivious, tried to rally, saying the event might clear her name. I let her believe it, my silence a trap. That night, I sat in my study, the projector remote in hand, and reviewed my speech. It wasn't long, just enough to introduce the presentation as a reflection on truth in art. The words were neutral, but their weight would crush her. Clara slept fitfully, her dreams likely haunted by the board's verdict. I felt no remorse, only the calm of a man who'd built a perfect machine. The event was hours away, and with it, the end of her lies. I wasn't just exposing her. I was erasing the Clara she'd pretended to be, leaving only the truth she'd tried to bury. As I locked my study, I glanced at our wedding photo, its frame dusty, and knew tomorrow would be my masterpiece. A cruel, unflinching reckoning she'd never forget. The backyard glowed under string lights, the quartet's music weaving through the crowd. Guests mingled, sipping wine, their chatter a hum of anticipation. Clara, in a sapphire dress, played the perfect host, her smile fragile but convincing. She thought this was my gift, a chance to salvage her reputation. I greeted guests, my suit crisp, my demeanor warm, while the projector waited, hidden behind a curtain. Margaret was there, her eyes sharp, Tom Weiss, notebook in hand. Evelyn Hart, her presence a quiet threat. Julian arrived late, his face haggard, avoiding Clara's gaze. I let the evening build, serving canapes, toasting art and community. Clara relaxed slightly, her laughter forced but passable. Guests complimented her, unaware of the storm coming. I caught her glancing at Julian, their connection strained, a flicker of fear in her eyes. The board's suspension hung over her, and the art world whispers, fueled by my blog post, followed her like shadows. I waited, patient, until the crowd was settled, the quartet paused, and the moment was mine. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, standing by the screen, remote in pocket. "Tonight, we celebrate truth in art, and the stories behind it." Clara beamed, thinking I was honoring her. I nodded to the technician, and the projector hummed to life. The first slide appeared, a photo of Clara and Julian in Seattle, her hand on his knee, captioned, "Curator's favoritism." The crowd gasped, Clara's smile freezing. I kept my voice steady, narrating as slides followed. Emails, receipts, her voice confessing to Julian. I risked everything. Each image was a blow, her betrayal laid bare. Clara stood, her face ashen, stammering, "Dan, what is this?" I didn't look at her, addressing the crowd instead. "This is the truth behind our gallery's star curator." Julian tried to slip out, but Evelyn blocked him, her voice icy. "Stay." Margaret's pen scratched furiously, her board roll now a judge's. Guests whispered, some horrified, others riveted. As the final slide appeared, our wedding photo, captioned, "What was lost?" I paused, letting the silence crush her. Clara ran inside, her sobs echoing, but I didn't follow. Julian faced Evelyn's wrath, his career ashes. Margaret approached me, her tone grim. "We'll handle this." The crowd dispersed, their shock a wildfire that would spread. I stood by the screen, the projector dark, and felt the weight of my victory. It wasn't joy, it was justice, cold and final. Clara's world, her job, her lover, her reputation, was gone. dismantled by my hand. I planned every detail, and it had worked. As guests left, their glances pitying or accusing, I knew the final act was Clara's confrontation. I walked inside, ready to face her, not as her husband but as the man who'd rewritten her story, leaving her nothing but the truth she'd tried to escape. Clara was in our bedroom, her dress crumpled, her face streaked with tears. The house was silent, the guests gone, the backyard a graveyard of my revenge. She looked at me, her eyes raw, and whispered, "Why, Dan?" I stood in the doorway, my voice steady. "You know why. You chose him, Clara. You chose lies." She shook her head, denying it, but the projector's images hung between us, undeniable. I didn't shout. My calm was crueler, a blade honed by months of her betrayal. I laid out the truth, her secret meetings, the gallery funds, the life she'd built with Julian behind my back. "I trusted you," I said, "and you made me a fool." She tried to explain, claiming it was just passion, not love, but her words were hollow, excuses for a choice she'd made. I showed her the final email, her confession to Julian, and she crumpled, no defense left. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed, but I felt nothing. Her pain was her consequence, not my burden. I told her I'd filed for divorce, the papers already with a lawyer. The house, our shared dream, would be sold. I'd start over, free of her shadow. Clara begged me to reconsider, to fix us. But I shook my head. "You fixed this," I said, gesturing to the wreckage of her life. The gallery had fired her that morning, Margaret's call confirming it. Julian was a pariah, his career dead, his debts crushing him. Their fantasy was ashes, and I'd lit the match. I didn't stay to comfort her. I packed a bag, my movements deliberate, and left her in the bedroom, her sobs fading as I closed the door. I drove to a hotel, the city lights a blur, and checked in, my mind clear. The art world was ablaze with the scandal, Clara's name synonymous with disgrace, Julian's with failure. My event had spread beyond Portland, blogs and forums dissecting their fall. I'd planned it perfectly, each step a brick in their ruin, and now I was done. Months later, I heard Clara had moved to a small town, working retail, her art world dreams buried. Julian vanished, his sculptures unsold, his loft foreclosed. I sold the house, started a new firm, and rebuilt my life, piece by piece. The pain of her betrayal lingered, a scar, but I was free. I'd loved her once, but she'd chosen a lie, and I'd chosen truth. A cruel, unrelenting truth that stripped her bare. As I walked through my new apartment, the walls blank, I hung a single frame. Not our wedding photo, but a blueprint, my design for a future she'd never touch. I was Daniel, the architect, and my story at last was mine alone.